Hello, my friends. Come closer. Find a comfortable spot. Maybe pull a blanket around your shoulders. Maybe make yourself something warm to drink. Because today, we're going to talk about something that seems very modern, very Hollywood, very 21st century. Plastic surgery. But here is what I want you to know before we begin. The story of plastic surgery does not start in a celebrity clinic. It does not start with a famous actress wanting a smaller nose. It does not start with anyone wanting to look more beautiful. It starts in a trench, in France, in 1917, with young men coming home from the most brutal war the world had ever seen, with faces so completely destroyed that the doctors who saw them had no idea what to do. No training, no tools, no techniques, nothing. And one man, one quiet, determined, extraordinary man, decided that was simply not acceptable. What he built in that moment of desperation in a converted hospital ward surrounded by the sounds of war would change the entire world forever. So settle in, my friends, take a breath, and let this story carry you somewhere unexpected. And before we begin, if stories like this make you see the world a little differently, please hit subscribe right now. Every single week we uncover history that was buried and forgotten and never properly told. I would love to have you with me for every one of them. We need to go back to World War I. Now, most of us know World War I was terrible. We know about the trenches. We know about the mud and the cold and the fighting. But there is something about World War I that history books tend to skip over quietly. The weapons. The weapons of World War I were something entirely new, something the human body had never faced before. Mustard gas that burned through skin like acid, artillery shells that exploded, sending thousands of tiny metal fragments flying at impossible speed in every direction, flamethrowers, explosive charges detonating directly in front of human faces. Men survived these weapons, but their faces did not. Burns covering entire faces, noses completely gone, cheekbones collapsed inward, eyelids destroyed, jaws shattered beyond recognition. These young men, boys really, many of them were barely 18 years old, survived the war, but they came home looking so different from the boys who had left that their own mothers sometimes did not recognize them. And what happened then broke hearts in ways that never made it into any history book. Some men refused to look in mirrors, not once, not ever again. Some refused to leave their hospital rooms. They would sit by the window and watch the world outside, but would not step into it, could not face the stares, could not face the pity, could not face the children who ran from them in fear. They had survived the war, but they were prisoners of something else entirely. And the doctors, the best doctors of 1917, looked at these men and felt completely helpless, because medicine had simply never seen anything like this before. There was no textbook, no training, no established procedure. There was nothing. Until one man walked into a converted hospital ward in Aldershot, England, and decided that nothing was simply not good enough. His name was Harold Gillies, and he was about to change everything. Harold Gillies was not supposed to be a hero. He was a quiet man, a New Zealand surgeon who had come to England before the war, a man who liked golf and painting and the company of good friends. He was not dramatic. He was not the kind of man who made grand speeches or bold declarations. But when Harold Gillies walked into that ward and saw those young soldiers sitting alone in their corners, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, something happened to him, something quiet and deep and completely permanent. He made them a promise not out loud, not with ceremony or announcement, just quietly, to himself, standing in that ward, surrounded by the sounds of suffering. "I will fix this." Now, my friends, I want you to understand what an extraordinary promise that was, because what Harold Gillies was promising was essentially impossible. Human skin does not simply grow back. Human bone does not reshape itself. A nose that has been destroyed by a mustard gas explosion does not return. The medical understanding of 1917 said these injuries cannot be repaired. These faces cannot be restored. The best we can do is keep these men alive and comfortable. Harold Gillies said that is not enough, and he started experimenting. He read every medical paper ever written about skin repair. He contacted surgeons around the world asking for knowledge nobody had properly gathered yet. He studied, he thought, he experimented on techniques that had never been tried on human beings before. And then he started operating. The first surgeries were basic, imperfect. Sometimes they failed. But Harold Gillies was not the kind of man who stopped when things failed. He invented something called a tube pedicle. Now, do not let that complicated name frighten you, my friends. The idea is actually beautiful in its simplicity. Imagine you need to move living skin from a soldier's chest up to his destroyed face. But living skin needs blood supply to survive. If you simply cut it off and move it, it dies. So Harold Gillies did something extraordinary. He created a tube, a living tunnel of skin attached at both ends. One end staying connected to the chest, keeping the blood flowing, while the other end was slowly moved upward toward the face, week by week by week. The skin stayed alive because it was never completely cut off from its blood supply. It traveled like a living bridge from chest to face. The results were miraculous. Not perfect, nothing was perfect, but men who had come in with no nose left with a nose. Men who had come in refusing to look at themselves left able to look in a mirror. Not at their old face, but at a face, a human face, their face. And Harold Gillies kept going. He was not satisfied with good enough. He pushed further every single week. He performed over 11,000 surgeries on more than 5,000 soldiers. 11,000. Think about that number, my friends. One man, one ward, one impossible promise. 11,000 times he kept it. The war ended in 1918. The soldiers went home, and Harold Gillies went back to being a quiet man who liked golf and painting and the company of good friends. But something had changed. What he had built in that hospital ward, those techniques, those methods, those discoveries, did not disappear when the war ended. They lived. They spread. Other surgeons had watched Harold Gillies' work, had learned from him, had written down what he taught them, and they carried that knowledge out into the world when the war was over. And they started asking a question that nobody had quite asked before. If we can rebuild a face destroyed by war, can we change a face that was never destroyed at all? Can we fix a nose that was simply born a shape the owner does not love? Can we lift skin that is simply aged the way skin naturally ages? Can we use these wartime techniques in peacetime? The answer, as you already know, my friends, was yes. But the journey from wartime reconstruction to peacetime cosmetic surgery was not simple, it was not clean, and it was not without controversy. The medical community was deeply divided. Some doctors said these techniques were developed to heal suffering. Using them purely for vanity is wrong. It dishonors the soldiers whose pain created this knowledge. Other doctors said, if a person suffers because of how they look, if their appearance causes them genuine pain and limits their life, then helping them is healing too. This debate, my friends, this exact debate, is still happening today. But while the debate was happening, the patients were already arriving. First, quietly, discreetly, wealthy people who'd heard about these surgical possibilities and came seeking them privately. Then, less quietly. Then, Hollywood discovered it. And when Hollywood discovered plastic surgery, everything changed forever. The 1920s and 1930s brought the golden age of cinema, and cinema brought something completely new to human experience: the close-up. For the first time in human history, faces were being displayed on enormous screens, 30 feet tall in front of thousands of strangers. Every pore, every asymmetry, every feature that might look perfectly fine in ordinary life was now magnified to impossible scale. The pressure was extraordinary. Studios began quietly suggesting, then insisting, then writing into contracts that their stars make certain changes. Fix this, adjust that, come back looking different. And the stars, desperate to keep their contracts, their careers, their place in the most glamorous industry in the world, complied. In secret, always in secret. Because in the 1930s and 1940s, admitting to plastic surgery was career-ending. The whole world had to believe it was natural. Harold Gillies, the quiet New Zealand surgeon who just wanted to help broken soldiers, had accidentally handed Hollywood the most powerful secret in its history. My friends, we need to talk about what happened next. Because what Harold Gillies built in that hospital ward in 1917, that miracle of healing and restoration and giving broken men back their human dignity, became something much larger than he ever intended. Much more complicated, much more powerful, and honestly, much more troubling. The techniques spread from Hollywood to the world, slowly at first, then faster, then so fast that by the second half of the 20th century, plastic surgery had become a global industry worth billions of dollars, serving millions of people every single year. And somewhere along that journey, something shifted. Harold Gillies had used these techniques to give people back what they had lost, to restore, to heal, to say, here is your face, here is your humanity, here is what the war took from you, returned. But the industry that grew from his work began to say something different. It began to say, here is what you could be. Here is what you should be. Here is the standard of beauty that exists, and here is how close we can bring you to it. That shift from restoration to aspiration changed everything. And it created a world where the most natural thing, a human face aging as human faces have always aged, began to feel like a problem to be fixed. Where the ordinary variations of human features, the noses and chins and ears that make every face unique, began to feel like failures. Where the impossible standard of beauty that Harold Gillies accidentally helped create became the measuring stick against which ordinary people measured themselves and found themselves lacking. This, my friends, is the complicated legacy of one good man's extraordinary work. He wanted to heal, and he did. He healed 5,000 soldiers, gave them back their faces, kept his impossible promise 11,000 times. That part of the story is beautiful, completely and purely beautiful. But the world that grew from that beauty is more complicated, more painful, and more worth understanding. Because the next time you see an advertisement suggesting your face needs improving, or feel that quiet, uncomfortable feeling that your ordinary human features are somehow not enough, I want you to remember Harold Gillies, standing in that hospital ward in 1917, looking at young men who had genuinely lost their faces. And what he built he built for them. Not for an advertisement, not for a standard, not for an industry. For 5,000 broken boys who just wanted to look in a mirror again. That, my friends, is where plastic surgery was born. And now, you know the whole story. My friends, we have traveled a long way today, from a World War I trench in France to a hospital ward in England, to the golden age of Hollywood, to the complicated modern world we live in now. And through it all, at the very beginning of all of it, one quiet man who liked golf and painting made an impossible promise to broken soldiers and kept it 11,000 times. If this story moved you, if it made you think about something differently, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to keep traveling through history like this, the stories that were buried and forgotten and never properly told, I will be here every single week, waiting for you, with another story worth knowing. Take care of yourselves, my friends.